Welcome back to Outlaw Operations. Tonight, we're diving into a chilling case filled with deception, greed, and betrayal. A story that seemed to be about love and ambition but ended in tragedy. Before we get into it, take a second to drop a comment. Where are you listening from? And if you enjoy true crime storytelling, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's settle in and get started. He explained later, with regret, that he had left the door open because he didn't want to go back for the keys after their argument, a decision he would blame himself for every day. As for Parker, his fate had been sealed in 1999, sentenced to death for his role in the crime. But years had passed, and that sentence had never been carried out. California's moratorium on executions meant Parker continued to wait, trapped in a cell, the years stretching endlessly before him. He remained incarcerated, his life on death row nothing more than a waiting game. The case we're diving into today will grip you, mystery lovers. It's a case that's both heartbreaking and haunting, a chilling reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. This is the tragic story of Crystal Perry. Crystal Perry was born on August 23, 1963, in Rumford, Maine, the youngest of 10 children. Her parents struggled to provide for their large family, which meant Crystal and her siblings had to grow up quickly, learning independence from an early age. Life was hard for the Perry children, and they all yearned to build lives of their own, free from the hardships they'd faced growing up. Eventually, Crystal and her siblings spread out across different states, each one seeking better opportunities, a fresh start. It was in high school that Crystal met Tom, the man who would become her husband. They got married and moved to California, hoping for new possibilities. But life in the city wasn't what Crystal had imagined. After just a year and a half, they made the decision to return to Maine. They settled in the small town of Brickton, not far from Crystal's childhood home. Crystal found work at a local shoe store, while Tom bounced between various odd jobs. They were building a life, but it wasn't the life Crystal had hoped for. Things took a dramatic turn when Crystal discovered she was pregnant. The news should have been a joy, but it only seemed to make matters worse. Tom, who had once been so excited about becoming a father, began to change. He became more distant, spending all of his time at the bar and draining their limited resources on alcohol. Crystal's heartache grew when Tom took the money she'd saved up, money she'd planned to use for necessities, and used it to buy more alcohol. Their life became a constant struggle to make ends meet, but the money never seemed to stretch far enough. The tipping point came when Tom's drinking became so severe that they were unable to even afford basic things like food. Crystal couldn't take it anymore and filed for divorce. Tom's sporadic visits to see their daughter, Sarah, didn't do much to alleviate the situation. As time went on, Tom's behavior grew worse, especially when he found a new girlfriend. This woman, filled with jealousy and rage over Crystal's past relationship with Tom, began harassing Crystal. She would call, send threats, and even show up at Crystal's house, trying to provoke her. Crystal feared for her daughter's safety, and she became terrified that Tom's new girlfriend might hurt Sarah. To protect her daughter, Crystal moved in with her mother and worked hard to save enough money to buy a house of her own. After years of hard work, she finally managed to purchase a small home by a peaceful lake on the outskirts of Brickton. Crystal was determined to provide a stable, loving environment for Sarah, one where she could escape the trauma of the past. She poured all her love into raising Sarah, and they spent many quiet moments together, enjoying the simple things in life, like watching movies or talking about their day. But one night, everything changed. Crystal had gone to work as usual, and Sarah had gone to school. They shared a quiet dinner when Sarah got home, and Crystal tucked her daughter into bed, kissing her goodnight. The peace of the night was shattered a few hours later by a blood-curdling scream. At first, Sarah thought it was just her mother arguing on the phone. But then, the screams grew louder, more desperate. Something was horribly wrong. Sarah froze, unable to move, her heart pounding in her chest. She heard footsteps approaching, each step growing closer, and her fear reached a boiling point. She quickly hid behind the bed, praying that whoever it was wouldn't find her. The footsteps stopped, and then there was the sound of a kitchen drawer opening, followed by the clattering of utensils. Crystal's screams continued, louder and more frantic, begging for mercy. And then, a sound that would haunt Sarah forever, Crystal was stabbed. With each stab, Crystal's cries grew weaker, and Sarah realized, with gut-wrenching clarity, that she was helpless. She couldn't do anything. She was too terrified to even breathe. When the screams finally stopped, Sarah gathered every ounce of courage she had left and left her hiding spot, moving cautiously toward the kitchen. What she saw was something she would never be able to forget. Her mother lay in a pool of blood, lifeless, surrounded by the gruesome aftermath of the attack. In a daze, Sarah ran to the neighbors for help, her feet slipping on the blood that seemed to be everywhere. She found an Italian restaurant nearby, where the owner lived in an adjacent building. The door was opened for her, and they called 911. The officers arrived at the house to find a scene from a nightmare. The kitchen was covered in blood, on the walls, the floor, the appliances. It was clear that Crystal had died from the loss of blood. A handprint on the front door glass caught the officers' attention. It seemed to belong to Sarah, but no other fingerprints were found, just a trail of bloody shoe prints on the kitchen floor. Investigators took pictures, trying to discern the shoe size and model. They assumed these prints belonged to the killer. The blood trail led to Sarah's bedroom but stopped abruptly, as if the attacker had changed their mind. One particular detail stood out: the killer had tried to wipe away the blood, but their efforts were futile. The smear only spread the stain, revealing a desperation that only deepened the mystery. The irregular shape of the blood drops on the floor hinted at something more. Some drops appeared to have fallen at a 90-degree angle, suggesting they hadn't come from Crystal. Investigators suspected the attacker had been injured during the crime, and the bloodstains pointed to this grim possibility. The case was only beginning to unfold, but the trail of blood and the evidence left behind pointed to a shocking conclusion. A story of desperation, betrayal, and violence, one that would leave Sarah haunted forever. And as the investigation continued, the chilling truth would slowly begin to emerge. A trail of blood, thin and frantic, led straight to a discarded roll of tissue. It was a quiet but telling clue: the killer had tried to stem their own bleeding, using whatever was closest before fleeing in a panic. It wasn't neat. It wasn't planned to the last detail. It was desperate. The autopsy confirmed what the scene had already screamed: Crystal had suffered over 50 stab wounds. The attack wasn't just brutal, it was rage-filled. The murder weapon, believed to be a kitchen knife, was never recovered, suggesting that the killer might have brought it with him and taken it when he left. But one thing he didn't leave with was the entire knife. The force behind the stabbing had been so violent that part of the blade had snapped off and remained lodged in Crystal's body. As investigators combed through the carnage, another devastating truth emerged. Crystal had been sexually assaulted prior to her death. It wasn't just a murder, it was a crime layered in cruelty. DNA was collected, both from the scene and the assault, but there was a problem. The local forensics lab was drowning in cases, understaffed and underfunded. It would take at least 6 months for any results to come back. That left detectives to chase shadows without one of their most crucial tools. The home didn't show signs of a robbery. Nothing had been taken. No drawers rifled through, no electronics missing. It wasn't about money. There were also no signs of forced entry. The front door hadn't been broken into, it had been opened willingly. That detail changed everything. Crystal was wearing pajamas when she died, which meant she wasn't expecting company. Either she knew the person who showed up at her door, or they had somehow convinced her to let them in under false pretenses. Detectives started with the only living witness, Crystal's daughter, Sarah. She had been in the house during the attack and was now at the hospital, undergoing examination. When questioned, Sarah said she had remained in her bedroom, too afraid to come out until the house was quiet again. But detectives were uneasy. They pressed her about how she knew her mother had been stabbed. Sarah answered quickly, "It was just obvious." That didn't sit right. They continued to question her, 18 times in 3 days, but her story never changed. If she had seen something, she wasn't saying it. While Sarah's answers remained the same, other leads began to take shape. A local shoe store caught the attention of investigators after they noticed a pair of boots with a tread pattern that matched bloody prints found at the crime scene. This lead was thin, but then came another name, Teresa. She was the girlfriend of Crystal's ex-husband, and she had a history with Crystal. A bad one. There had been threats, vicious ones. Teresa had once said she wanted Crystal dead. But the evidence pointed to a male attacker. Still, investigators considered the possibility that Teresa might have manipulated or recruited someone else to do her bidding. That theory, too, led nowhere. Eventually, attention turned to a man named Dennis. He wasn't a stranger. He and Crystal had been seeing each other for 2 years. They met at the very same shoe store that had caught the detective's interest. He had even proposed once. She'd accepted, but they never made it to the altar. Their relationship was rocky. Fights were common. Dennis had a temper. He smashed things when he got mad. Punched walls. But Crystal's friends said he never laid a hand on her. Not that they knew of. Detectives paid Dennis a visit the day after Crystal was killed. As soon as they asked if he had seen her the night before, Dennis blurted out, "Is she dead?" Then collapsed, unconscious. When he came to, he explained that he had planned to visit Crystal that night but was delayed helping a friend fix a car. When he eventually called her, she told him it was too late. They argued, and he stayed home. His alibi checked out. The friend confirmed his story. Still, Dennis agreed to a polygraph. Most of the results were clean. But one question tripped him up: "Do you feel responsible for Crystal's death?" He answered no, but his body said otherwise. It didn't help that Dennis wore the same shoe size as the prints found at the scene. But no shoes matching those prints were found in his home. When asked for a DNA sample, Dennis agreed, but he made an odd request. If he were to be arrested, he asked that it be done quietly, through the back entrance of his workplace. He didn't want to embarrass his boss or disturb his coworkers. It was a considerate request on the surface, but in context, it raised red flags. Why ask that unless he feared what might come next? Then came a call that shifted the tone of the investigation. Crystal's best friend, who lived out of town, told detectives that Crystal had recently confided in her. She had been scared. Dennis's anger had escalated. Their fights were more intense. Crystal had started to consider breaking things off, but she was afraid of what Dennis might do if she did. Detectives also tried talking to one of Crystal's co-workers, hoping for more context. At first, she didn't have much to offer. Just another routine interview, until something clicked. After the police packed up and left, Dennis wasn't done. He showed up at the victim's workplace, casually weaving his way through co-workers, trying to piece together what she had told the detectives. It wasn't subtle, his questions were pointed, and his presence felt off. Meanwhile, the investigation dragged on, slow and frustrating, with no concrete evidence tying Dennis or anyone else to the scene. The DNA results? Still months away, buried under backlogs and bureaucracy. Detectives didn't sit idle. They followed every crumb, even the strange ones. One tip led them to a local man named Donnie. The story went that he drunkenly bragged at a party about killing Crystal. But when they sat him down, he swore up and down he had no memory of saying any of it. No memory of the party at all, in fact. It was a dead end. Just another local rumor lost in the noise. The case was slipping into that quiet place where unsolved murders go, where posters fade and memories start to twist around the edges. Crystal's family refused to let that happen. They offered a $10,000 reward and plastered flyers all over town. But someone was working against them. Teresa, the girlfriend of Crystal's ex-husband, was seen tearing down those flyers. Over and over again. Her behavior raised alarms, but it didn't come with answers. Tom, Crystal's ex, was pulled under the spotlight. But after digging into his life, detectives concluded he was too far gone, drowning in alcohol every single day, barely functioning. No motive, no capacity, no evidence. Just a broken man with more regrets than reasons. 2 other men from Crystal's past, both former flames, were also questioned. Their backgrounds checked, their DNA taken, and still, nothing. Each of them, including Dennis and Tom, submitted samples for analysis. And then they waited. 9 long months passed before the results came back. No matches. Not to any of them. Not even close. Out of desperation, investigators requested another sample from Dennis, hoping for a mistake, a missed detail. But the answer stayed the same. No match. No closer to the truth. With nowhere else to turn, the detectives circled back to the only living witness, Sarah. Something about her story still felt incomplete. Maybe she was hiding something. Maybe trauma had locked away the truth somewhere deep in her memory. Whatever it was, they needed to try again. They tracked her down in Texas, where she was living with her aunt. She agreed to take a polygraph. The results didn't show any deception. Still, they pressed her, hard. Question after question, hour after hour. But Sarah never changed her story. She hadn't seen the killer. Years slipped by. The case stayed open, but cold. Interviews came and went. Tips faded out. Hope thinned. Until the late 1990s, when a new tool arrived, the FBI's National DNA Database. Investigators uploaded the unknown killer's DNA. The system combed through its files, searching for a match. Nothing. It was like the killer had vanished into smoke. As a last shot, detectives asked Sarah to work with a psychologist. Maybe something buried deep would come loose. She agreed, but after several sessions, the conclusion was the same: she truly didn't remember anything more. Then, years later, in 2006, something shifted. A DNA sample was uploaded into the system, and this time, it hit. The profile matched blood and semen left at the crime scene. The name that came back was Michael Hutchinson. He wasn't even on their radar. Not once. Not ever. Digging into his background, investigators discovered that Michael had been arrested back in 2003 for assault and threatening someone with a weapon. He served 6 months in jail, followed by probation. During that arrest, a DNA sample had been collected, but never uploaded to the database. It just sat in a lab, forgotten. 3 years later, he was arrested again, this time for drunk driving, with his kids in the car. He made bail, but skipped court. That landed him behind bars once more. And on the very day of a local wedding, of all days, he was picked up and thrown into a cell. This time, his DNA was finally uploaded. And that was the moment the past collided with the present. Detectives reached out to Sarah, told her there was a development, but asked her to keep it quiet for now. When shown the name, she said she didn't know him. Michael Hutchinson was already in custody. The detective, knowing how fragile the case could be, began building it slowly, carefully, making sure every piece fit, no room for him to slip through. Further digging uncovered that back when Crystal was murdered, Michael lived in Bridgeton, just 2 miles from her home. He had been 19. He lived near the Italian restaurant, the one close to where Sarah had called 911. His daily route often took him past Crystal Street. He drove by her place often. Maybe he noticed her. Maybe they crossed paths one too many times. In the quiet aftermath of that DNA match, all the noise of years past, the rumors, the dead ends, the unanswered questions, finally began to fall into place. Michael sat behind the cold steel bars of his cell, his eyes hollow, his expression unreadable. He had insisted from the very beginning that he didn't know Crystal. That he had never seen her before. Yet there she was, Crystal, lifeless on the floor of her own home, with his DNA on her body and his blood at the scene. A denial like his, in the face of such evidence, rang hollow. The detective, seasoned and skeptical, found no trace of truth in Michael's words. The visit to the prison wasn't just routine, it was a step toward clarity. That's when the detective noticed it, a deep, faded scar slashed across Michael's palm. At first glance, it might have meant nothing. But in the context of Crystal's murder, it said volumes. The nature of the crime suggested a violent struggle, one that likely ended with the killer injured, bleeding. The scar hinted at a past wound, one that fit too neatly into the timeline of Crystal's death. No, it wouldn't be enough to convict on its own. But paired with the DNA, it was damning. The prosecution painted a chilling picture. Michael, known for his drug use, had passed by Crystal's house that night. Maybe he saw an opportunity, maybe it was premeditated, no one would ever know. But what followed was pure horror. He attacked her. Brutally. And when it was over, Crystal was dead. He never confessed, never gave them the satisfaction. But the evidence? It didn't lie. In court, the defense tried to create a story. Michael claimed they had met at a bar, spent time together, even shared a consensual night. Then, out of nowhere, he said a man in a black motorcycle jacket burst into the house, knocked him out cold, and murdered Crystal. When he came to, he said he tried to fight back but failed. He fled, bleeding, afraid. That's how he explained the scar. That's how he tried to explain everything. But nothing about his story held up. No one at the bar remembered seeing them. The only shoe prints at the scene were his. The so-called intruder. Apparently, he took off his shoes before committing a murder. And despite such a violent act, there were no signs that another person had even been there. Then came the oddest detail of all. There were no fingerprints. Not even Michael's. But the mystery was solved in the most unexpected way. Michael worked as a bricklayer. Years of grinding, rough labor had worn down the ridges of his fingertips. His hands were nearly printless. It was the kind of detail you'd expect in a crime novel, not real life. On April 9, 2007, the jury reached its decision, unanimous. Guilty. Michael was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Crystal's daughter, Sarah, lost her mother in the most devastating way. The pain didn't fade, but in time, Sarah found the strength to carry it. She poured her grief into something more powerful, a book. Her mother's story. A tribute. A warning. A legacy carved from loss. Years later, another name would find its way into the whispers of true crime followers, Zoe Hastings. Zoe was the kind of girl people remembered. The oldest of 5, with a quiet strength and a deep sense of responsibility. She was creative, artistic, and compassionate. Her family's faith was the cornerstone of their life, and Zoe carried it with her like armor. When her family moved to Dallas, Zoe thrived in her new school, joining theater and devoting time to her church. By 18, she was preparing for a mission trip, eager to serve, to give back. But all that promise vanished in a single night. It was October 2015. Zoe left her house at 4:40 p.m., driving the family's minivan to church. She told her parents she'd be back for dinner. She never returned. Calls went unanswered. Texts, ignored. Panic crept in slowly, then all at once. Her parents called the church. Zoe never arrived. That was not like her. She was responsible. Reliable. Something was wrong. They reported her missing that night. Police retraced the route from her home to the church. Nothing. Then, her phone was found, abandoned near a small creek, only a few hundred yards from the church. It was there, standing beside the water, that her parents got the news. An officer approached them. There had been a car accident reported earlier. A witness walking his dog said a strange man had told him that a woman had been injured in a crash. That man disappeared. The witness followed the direction he was given and found a woman lying in a pool of blood. It was Zoe. The scene told a story far darker than a car accident. Her minivan, half submerged in the creek, looked more like a decoy than the result of a crash. Her body was found nearby, blood pooling around her. Her dress was disturbed. Her underwear rolled down. The investigators didn't need to be told what happened. The violence was written across her skin. The doors of the van were all locked, except the driver's. A sign that perhaps Zoe hadn't been alone when she arrived. That she never stood a chance. As her parents stood behind the police tape, they were shielded from the worst of it. But even without seeing, they knew the truth. The kind of pain that runs deeper than words. The search for her killer would consume months. Leads would surface and vanish. But the memory of Zoe, and the horror of what happened that day, would remain etched into the hearts of those who knew her, and those who only met her through the tragedy of her end. These cases, Michael and Crystal, Zoe and her unknown killer, serve as brutal reminders. That behind every headline is a family, a life, a future stolen. And sometimes, the most chilling stories are the ones that begin with someone simply leaving the house, promising they'll be right back. Michael sat behind the cold steel bars of his cell, his eyes hollow, his expression unreadable. He had insisted from it was the kind of case that seeps under your skin, the kind you don't just read about and move on from. Zoe had left her home at 4:41 p.m., her day seemingly unremarkable, her intentions likely mundane. By 5:01 p.m., she had arrived at the creek. She wouldn't leave that area alive. What followed was a frantic unraveling of minutes, painstakingly reconstructed by investigators trying to stitch together the final moments of a young woman's life. Her phone's GPS showed she'd taken about 20 minutes to drive to that quiet spot. That gave a chilling window. Within just a few minutes of arriving, Zoe had likely already crossed paths with the person who would take her life. Down beneath the bridge, just 10 feet from the water, a knife stained with blood lay waiting. It wasn't just a discarded weapon, it was a silent witness. The weapon, investigators believed, used to end Zoe's life. And the scene itself was eerily calm, as if whatever happened had unfolded swiftly, without warning, and with terrifying precision. Zoe's last known stop was a short visit to a local DVD rental store, one of those places tucked beside a Walgreens, familiar to the community. More than 50 people confirmed seeing her in the area, including Lester Clark, a tattoo shop employee who worked just next door. Lester recalled seeing her around 4:45 p.m. He also noticed a man loitering nearby, someone who didn't quite fit in. Lester said the man was short, heavily built, and African American. He didn't get a closer look, but the image stuck with him. Then came Gary Whitman, homeless, often unnoticed, but not unobservant. He was also near the store that day and, around the same time, saw something troubling. A woman, Zoe, approached her white minivan in the parking lot. A man walked up from behind. Gary said the man pulled something from his pocket, something that made the woman freeze. She got into the passenger seat. The man got in the driver's side and drove away. Gary knew what he'd seen wasn't right. He ran inside the store and asked the clerk to call 911. Whether the call was ever made, remains unclear. The investigation deepened. A forensic pathologist confirmed what many feared: Zoe had been sexually assaulted before her death. A small trace of male DNA was found, but there wasn't enough to run a full analysis. Her vehicle was examined too, but any foreign fingerprints had been wiped clean. Someone had taken the time to erase their presence. Still, that didn't erase the horror of what happened. They found hairs on Zoe's body, tiny fragments, frustratingly too small to identify. But then came a break, a blood-stained knife near the creek. Forensics pulled a viable DNA profile. It matched a man named Antonio Cochran. He was 34 years old, with a criminal history that darkened every room it entered: assault, theft, home invasion. A year before Zoe's murder, he had been accused of sexually assaulting a 17-year-old girl, the daughter of his girlfriend's friend. He said the act was consensual. The court couldn't prove otherwise. He walked free. Antonio quickly became the prime suspect in Zoe's murder. He was arrested, but he denied everything. Still, investigators pressed on. They collected his DNA and compared it to the partial profiles found on Zoe. It wasn't enough for a full match, but it was close enough to keep looking. What they found next was unsettling. Antonio's phone was a mirror to his chaos. The day before Zoe's murder, he messaged a friend, saying he was leaving and they'd never see him again. In the early morning hours, he texted his ex, claiming his stepmother had died right in front of him, a lie. Then, just before Zoe's death, he texted another woman, saying he was drunk, driving, and crying. That was the last she heard from him that day. By 9:30 that night, he texted a friend, rambling about how lost he felt. The next morning, a message to his ex-girlfriend read, "My life is over. Soon you'll understand why." Detectives traced his digital footprints. Over 30 times, he visited news articles about local crimes before his arrest, 5 of them directly about Zoe's murder. He had never shown this kind of interest in news before. One page, oddly enough, was about gang activity. But the most damning clue wasn't just what he read, it was where he had been. His phone's GPS showed it connected to a cell tower covering the exact area of the DVD store at 4:34 p.m., placing him in Zoe's vicinity just minutes before she vanished. That same phone had been pinging off towers miles away all day, except for that brief, critical moment. Maybe it was chance. Maybe it was a coincidence. Or maybe it was something far more sinister, a man with a past drawn to a moment he couldn't resist. Zoe's story didn't end at the creek. It ended in questions, in traces, in fragments of truth. But behind it all lingered a name, a face, and a series of choices that led to the final breath of a life that deserved so much more. The very beginning that he didn't know Crystal. That he had never seen her before. Yet there she was, Crystal, lifeless on the floor of her own home, with his DNA on her body and his blood at the scene. A denial like his, in the face of such evidence, rang hollow. The detective, seasoned and skeptical, found no trace of truth in Michael's words. The visit to the prison wasn't just routine, it was a step toward clarity. That's when the detective noticed it, a deep, faded scar slashed across Michael's palm. At first glance, it might have meant nothing. But in the context of Crystal's murder, it said volumes. The nature of the crime suggested a violent struggle, one that likely ended with the killer injured, bleeding. The scar hinted at a past wound, one that fit too neatly into the timeline of Crystal's death. No, it wouldn't be enough to convict on its own. But paired with the DNA, it was damning. The prosecution painted a chilling picture. Michael, known for his drug use, had passed by Crystal's house that night. Maybe he saw an opportunity, maybe it was premeditated, no one would ever know. But what followed was pure horror. He attacked her. Brutally. And when it was over, Crystal was dead. He never confessed, never gave them the satisfaction. But the evidence? It didn't lie. In court, the defense tried to create a story. Michael claimed they had met at a bar, spent time together, even shared a consensual night. Then, out of nowhere, he said a man in a black motorcycle jacket burst into the house, knocked him out cold, and murdered Crystal. When he came to, he said he tried to fight back but failed. He fled, bleeding, afraid. That's how he explained the scar. That's how he tried to explain everything. But nothing about his story held up. No one at the bar remembered seeing them. The only shoe prints at the scene were his. The so-called intruder. Apparently, he took off his shoes before committing a murder. And despite such a violent act, there were no signs that another person had even been there. Then came the oddest detail of all. There were no fingerprints. Not even Michael's. But the mystery was solved in the most unexpected way. Michael worked as a bricklayer. Years of grinding, rough labor had worn down the ridges of his fingertips. His hands were nearly printless. It was the kind of detail you'd expect in a crime novel, not real life. On April 9, 2007, the jury reached its decision, unanimous. Guilty. Michael was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Crystal's daughter, Sarah, lost her mother in the most devastating way. The pain didn't fade, but in time, Sarah found the strength to carry it. She poured her grief into something more powerful, a book. Her mother's story. A tribute. A warning. A legacy carved from loss. Years later, another name would find its way into the whispers of true crime followers, Zoe Hastings. Zoe was the kind of girl people remember. The oldest of 5, with a quiet strength and a deep sense of responsibility. She was creative, artistic, and compassionate. Her family's faith was the cornerstone of their life, and Zoe carried it with her like armor. When her family moved to Dallas, Zoe thrived in her new school, joining theater and devoting time to her church. By 18, she was preparing for a mission trip, eager to serve, to give back. But all that promise vanished in a single night. It was October 2015. Zoe left her house at 4:40 p.m., driving the family's minivan to church. She told her parents she'd be back for dinner. She never returned. Calls went unanswered. Texts, ignored. Panic crept in slowly, then all at once. Her parents called the church. Zoe never arrived. That was not like her. She was responsible. Reliable. Something was wrong. They reported her missing that night. Police retraced the route from her home to the church. Nothing. Then, her phone was found, abandoned near a small creek, only a few hundred yards from the church. It was there, standing beside the water, that her parents got the news. An officer approached them. There had been a car accident reported earlier. A witness walking his dog said a strange man had told him that a woman had been injured in a crash. That man disappeared. The witness followed the direction he was given and found a woman lying in a pool of blood. It was Zoe. The scene told a story far darker than a car accident. Her minivan, half submerged in the creek, looked more like a decoy than the result of a crash. Her body was found nearby, blood pooling around her. Her dress was disturbed. Her underwear rolled down. The investigators didn't need to be told what happened. The violence was written across her skin. The doors of the van were all locked, except the driver's. A sign that perhaps Zoe hadn't been alone when she arrived. That she never stood a chance. As her parents stood behind the police tape, they were shielded from the worst of it. But even without seeing, they knew the truth. The kind of pain that runs deeper than words. The search for her killer would consume months. Leads would surface and vanish. But the memory of Zoe, and the horror of what happened that day, would remain etched into the hearts of those who knew her, and those who only met her through the tragedy of her end. These cases, Michael and Crystal, Zoe and her unknown killer, serve as brutal reminders. That behind every headline is a family, a life, a future stolen. And sometimes, the most chilling stories are the ones that begin with someone simply leaving the house, promising they'll be right back. Just 3 days before it all happened, Antonio had started working at a small grocery store tucked into the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was something, a fresh start, maybe. But the day after Zoe was murdered, Antonio didn't show up for his shift. No call, no excuse, no explanation. Just silence. And in a case like this, silence spoke volumes. There was a growing pile of circumstantial evidence pointing in Antonio's direction. But none of it hit quite as hard as the DNA. His DNA, found on the handle of the knife used in the murder. Still, DNA alone doesn't draw a full picture. Holding a knife isn't the same as using it to kill. That was the gray area the defense clung to. Maybe Antonio had touched the knife earlier, in some unrelated moment, and it was later used by someone else. The possibility, however slim, was enough to cloud the certainty everyone desperately wanted. But the detectives had seen too many coincidences turn into patterns. No other weapon, no other fingerprints, no other suspects. And so, they moved forward, putting the case into the hands of the court. The prosecution built their version of that tragic night piece by piece. They claimed Antonio had spotted Zoe in the parking lot, a chance encounter. He was grieving, they said. Drunk. Angry. The weight of a relative's death mixing with a heavy dose of alcohol had made him volatile. Dangerous. According to their narrative, he threatened Zoe with a knife, forcing her into her own car. Then he took the wheel and drove. Maybe even without a real plan. They said he drove them to a quiet, hidden creek, surrounded by thick trees and terrain that swallowed sound. There, under the cover of shadows, he pulled her from the car. And there, he stabbed her 6 times in the neck. Then came the strange part. Instead of fleeing immediately, Antonio allegedly tried to drive the car into the creek, maybe to sink it, to destroy the evidence. But the car didn't fully submerge. It stuck. That gave him just enough time to try wiping his prints away from the steering wheel, from the door handles. And then he was gone, back to the store, where someone else would later claim to have seen him. That witness was Gary. A man with a troubled past, running from a parole violation. The defense attacked his credibility hard. A criminal pointing fingers. Convenient. They wanted the court to dismiss his testimony entirely. But Gary insisted on helping, even knowing it could mean jail for him. He said he just wanted to do what was right. The prosecution leaned into that, painting him as a flawed but honest man. The defense, meanwhile, tried to peel back the layers of the prosecution's story. The knife, sure, it had Antonio's DNA. But he could have touched it before, maybe at an old job at a movie theater, where he occasionally helped clean up after late shows. The theory was thin. There was no record of the knife ever being at the theater. No solid link. Just speculation. As for the timeline, Antonio's lawyers claimed he had been helping a friend at the time of the murder. But there were no texts, no calls, no one to back it up. It felt like a shadow defense, something there, but never quite taking shape. At first, prosecutors pushed for the death penalty. But as the trial stretched on, that goal began to slip out of reach. The evidence, while compelling, wasn't airtight. The case leaned more on gut and inference than hard proof. Eventually, they withdrew the death penalty request. When the jury finally returned, the verdict was clear: guilty of murder. Life in prison. Parole possible after 30 long years. Zoe's parents sat quietly in the courtroom, their faces hollow with both grief and relief. Her father, a man who had spent her entire life warning her about the dangers of the world, now spoke with a voice that trembled. He'd done everything he could to protect her. But danger had still found her, just blocks from their home. It was a cruel reminder that sometimes, no matter how tightly you hold on, the world takes what it wants anyway. And so, justice, if you could call it that, was served, not with triumph, but with mourning. They had planned a simple afternoon, a family outing to the shopping center so their son could pick out a new toy. Just an ordinary day. But before they even stepped inside the store, their young boy asked if they could take a quick walk behind the building. There was a well-known trail there, leading through the trees toward the river, a spot popular with locals for its quiet beauty and scenic views. The kind of place people went to clear their heads, not lose their innocence. The parents agreed, holding their sons' hands as they made their way onto the path. It was peaceful at first, the sun peeking through the leaves, birds calling in the distance. But barely 10 yards down the trail, that serenity was shattered. What they stumbled upon would etch itself into their minds forever. A man was on his knees over a small body, furiously striking it with a wooden object, again and again. The thuds were sickening. The moment he noticed the family, he bolted into the trees and vanished. The father, heart pounding, rushed to the scene. There, in a pool of blood, lay a young girl, still, broken, and unrecognizable beneath the red. His wife dropped to her knees and felt for a pulse. Nothing. The child was gone. Panicked but determined, the father sprinted back toward the shopping center and called the police from one of the nearby stores. When officers arrived, the shaken couple gave a detailed description of the attacker, a tall, slim man in his early 20s, long black hair, jean shorts, and boots. That sketch would soon be circulated throughout the area, but it would take more than a drawing to find justice. At the scene, investigators found the murder weapon, the wooden object used to deliver the fatal blows. But everything else, prints, hair, fibers, was either missing or wiped clean. The girl's hands were bound with a telephone cord, and her bikini top had been pulled down. Her t-shirt and shoes were discarded beside her. Despite how it looked, forensic tests found no signs of sexual assault. The victim was Christy. Her name would soon become known throughout the community. And as police worked to piece together the final hours of her life, a new lead surfaced, one that came from Christy's friend, Kim. She mentioned that Christy had spoken with another girl, Carol, about something strange, a supposed cheerleading competition happening behind the shopping mall. Carol was brought in for questioning. She told police that a man had called her, pretending to be a local DJ, and invited her to the event. He said it would start at 1:45 p.m. near the trail behind the mall. Carol had initially planned to go with her sister, but when they ran into Christy and her sibling, Carol invited Christy to come along instead. They left the younger girls behind and walked toward the trail. According to Carol, when they arrived, no one was there. She claimed she went inside the mall to ask for the time, and when she returned, Christy had vanished. Police immediately suspected something was off. They confirmed there was no cheerleading event in town. And Carol's story didn't quite match up with other accounts. She said she met Christy on the street, but Kim insisted they had been at the pool, and Carol had joined them there. Christy's mother also had a deeply unsettling exchange with Carol that night. Carol, visibly shaken, apologized and claimed that she had been the intended target, that two people had planned to kill her. But before she could explain further, she clammed up and left. The mother reported this to the police. Carol was brought in again. This time, she denied ever making the statement. A polygraph test showed no signs of deception, and without further evidence, the investigation moved on, away from Carol, toward new leads. Then, 3 days after Christy's murder, a patrol officer spotted a man walking the streets of Columbus who looked eerily similar to the sketch. They stopped him. His name was Jack Carmen, and he agreed to go with them for questioning. What they discovered stunned everyone. Jack, 25 years old, had the mental capacity of a child. His IQ hovered around 50. He couldn't read, couldn't write, and spoke in simple words. He lived in a supervised apartment and was under the care of a medical facility. Yet his face, his build, was undeniably close to the image described by the family who had seen the killer. Detectives began to wonder, could this man really understand what was happening? Could he even comprehend their questions? They tried everything, simplifying their language, rephrasing questions. For hours, Jack barely spoke. But eventually, after nearly 6 hours, a confession emerged in fragmented pieces. Jack said that on the day Christy was killed, he had taken the bus to the shopping center to buy a shirt and pants. As he walked through the parking lot, he saw Christy sitting on a fence near the wooded trail. He approached her, tied her hands, dragged her into the forest. He said she tried to run, but he caught her and struck her with a piece of wood. Then he fled to the main road and took the bus home. The next day, police brought Jack back to the scene. He pointed out where everything had happened. But even with this confession, doubts lingered. Was Jack simply repeating what he thought the detectives wanted to hear? Could someone with such limited understanding carry out such a violent and calculated crime alone? Or was he just a convenient scapegoat, someone easy to manipulate? Christie's murder left behind more questions than answers. A young girl robbed of her life, a community left in mourning, and a confession that raised as many suspicions as it resolved. The truth, as in so many crimes, lay buried in the shadows, hidden among whispers, tangled in lies, and waiting for someone to uncover it. There he stood, pointing to the very spot, the same place where Christie had been found. He described it with disturbing precision, down to the smallest detail, details only the person responsible for the crime could possibly know. One of the most chilling moments was when he mentioned how the piece of wood used to strike her had snapped in half. It wasn't something the public knew, not something someone could guess. It was something only the killer could reveal. Investigators took his word seriously and moved fast. To confirm his account, they turned to the couple who had originally found Christie's body. When shown a lineup, both individuals pointed to the same man, Jack. Without hesitation, they identified him as the person they'd seen the day of the incident. That was all the authorities needed to move forward. Jack was charged with multiple crimes, assault, murder, and everything in between. The prosecution initially pushed for the death penalty. They wanted to make an example of Jack. But his lawyer negotiated a deal. Jack would plead guilty in exchange for life in prison, sparing him from the electric chair. It all happened quickly. Just 11 days after the murder, on September 3rd, Jack was sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. But the story didn't end there. As the dust began to settle, something strange started to happen. People began to whisper, then question, then speak louder. Doubt crept into the public's mind. Was Jack really guilty? Could someone like him truly carry out something so brutal? Jack wasn't known to be aggressive or violent. In fact, most described him as quiet, passive, and painfully compliant. He was the kind of man who would say yes just to make others happy or to avoid confrontation. There was even an incident in his past where he took the blame for a broken boiler at a charity center, something he didn't even do. That kind of behavior painted a picture of a man who could be easily manipulated, especially by authority figures. People began to wonder if Jack had been coerced. Had the police fed him bits and pieces of the story, then watched as he parroted them back? It was entirely possible. If the detectives had asked, "Did you hit her with a piece of wood?" and he responded with a frightened, "Yes," that could have been twisted into a full confession. For someone like Jack, even the suggestion of the electric chair might have been enough to make him agree to anything. Things became even more suspicious when it came to the identification process. The same couple who found Christie had seen Jack at the crime scene, at the same time they were brought there by police. Officially, the authorities claimed the two never crossed paths. But in reality, they did. That made the witness testimony questionable. If they'd already seen Jack as a suspect, their identification of him wasn't truly unbiased. There were other red flags, too. No one came forward to say they'd seen Jack on the bus heading to the city center that day. And even more damaging, several people at the charity organization where Jack worked said they'd seen him at 1:30 p.m., just 20 minutes before the murder supposedly took place at 1:50 p.m. The bus ride from the organization to the outskirts of town would have taken at least 40 minutes. The timing simply didn't add up. As public pressure grew, even Christie's parents began to question Jack's guilt. On September 9th, just days after Jack's sentencing, a crowd of around 70 people gathered in front of City Hall. They weren't there to cause chaos, they were demanding justice. Not just for Christie, but for Jack. They formed a public committee and pushed for a deeper investigation into the case. Their efforts worked. Jack was assigned a new lawyer who quickly filed for a case review. Months later, a judge threw out Jack's original confession and called for a brand new trial. Suddenly, the burden was on the prosecution to prove Jack's guilt from scratch, and that wasn't going to be easy. Norman Mills, Christie's father, wasn't content with sitting back. He launched his own investigation, frustrated with how law enforcement had handled things. Right after the murder, he and several neighbors had searched the area themselves. In those woods, they discovered blood-stained jean shorts and a pair of men's underwear, items the police had somehow overlooked. They turned them in, but no one knew whether they'd ever been tested. The second trial started in 1977, 2 years after Christie's death. This time, Jack's defense team had two missions: prove his innocence and identify the real killer. And they had a new name in mind. The man who'd found Christie's body, Henry Newell. At the time of the murder, Henry was 25. On the surface, he seemed like a concerned citizen. But once his past came to light, it told a much darker story. As a teenager, Henry had been arrested multiple times. He'd been to prison 3 times already, and escaped twice. At the time of Jack's trial, he was serving his 4th sentence, this time for setting fire to a house to collect insurance money. But what really raised eyebrows was his testimony. Henry claimed he'd found Christie's body, and in a state of shock, he threw a bloody piece of wood to the side. That would just so happen to be the murder weapon. Why would anyone pick up a blood-soaked weapon and then casually toss it? His excuse, that he was traumatized, seemed flimsy at best. As the trial continued, more inconsistencies and suspicious details emerged. And with every revelation, the theory that Jack was innocent and Henry had framed him grew stronger. The story no longer felt like a case of justice being served. It felt like a tragic mistake, one that had stolen years from the life of an innocent man. He thought she was still alive, at least that's what he claimed. So, in a panic, he ripped off his shirt and pressed it to her face. Was it an attempt to stop the bleeding? Or was it something far darker? Maybe he wasn't trying to save her at all. Maybe he was trying to explain why his shirt was drenched in blood, fabric soaked in guilt, not mercy. The questions kept stacking up. A clerk at the mall where Henry had run to call the police later said she remembered him clearly. Shirtless. Wearing only jean shorts. But by the time the officers arrived, those shorts had vanished, replaced by different pants. The clerk also noticed something else: fresh bruises on his face, like someone had punched him. Odd, considering no one had mentioned the scuffle. When asked why she didn't immediately report this to the police, she said simply, "No one asked." And maybe that's the most haunting part: no one asked. Not even the officers, who should have seen the bruising but looked the other way. Henry, in an apparent act of cooperation, agreed to take a polygraph test. But as the machine powered up, so did his nerves. He vomited right onto the machine. A biological confession, some might say. Others called it stress. Either way, it didn't sit right. And then there was Henry's neighbor. He remembered seeing Henry that night, shaken and scratched, hands marked with thin red lines like he'd been clawing through something, or someone. What really struck him was a telephone cord he noticed hanging in Henry's garage. Same color, same twist, same look as the one used to bind the victim's hands. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, the neighbor remembered something Henry had said long before the murder: how he knew Carol, a 14-year-old girl and friend of the victim. He told a story about swimming naked with her. No one could forget a comment like that. It turned out Henry did know Carol. She was tied to the case in more ways than one. During the trial, his wife, Pam, stood by their story. They went to the mall. Their son, Bobby, asked to go for a walk. In the woods behind the mall, they found the body. Pam swore that Henry had stayed home the entire time, only stepping outside to chase away neighborhood kids throwing firecrackers. But Bobby would later unravel that narrative completely. Carol took the stand too. She claimed she never met Henry. When asked why she told the victim's mother, it shouldn't have gone this far, she said she didn't remember saying anything like that. Convenient, perhaps. Or maybe true. But even her memory, real or selective, added another layer of mystery. Henry never changed his story. Same details, same denials. But when the courtroom lights dimmed and Jack's interrogation tape played, silence fell like a blanket. Watching it, the jury saw the truth, or something close to it. Jack hadn't confessed. He had been led. Coached. His words echoed back like a hollow drum, agreeing with whatever the detective said, barely understanding what they meant. He didn't grasp what was happening, only that they wanted him to say something. And he did. Then came the 5th day of the trial, and with it, the storm. A new witness. Bobby. Henry's own stepson. His testimony cut like a blade through the courtroom air. He recalled that night. How Henry did leave the house. When he came back, the shirt and sandals were gone. His face and hands were covered in scratches. Bobby was told they were going to the mall, but instead, they wandered into the woods. Bobby didn't ask to go on a walk. That part was made up. There, in the shadows of the trees, they stumbled on Henry's torn sandal. And then, Christie's body. Bobby's mother told him, "Don't tell anyone what you saw." Later, Bobby's grandmother recalled a moment during Christie's memorial service. While everyone grieved, Henry whispered something that still echoes today: "It will teach her to keep her mouth shut." A friend of Henry's also came forward, saying that Henry had once admitted to killing Christie, though he called it an accident. Despite all of this, the prosecutor made a decision no one saw coming. They dropped the case against Henry. They said the original investigation was sound, even while acknowledging missed clues, overlooked bruises, ignored inconsistencies. The public erupted. Outrage boiled over, and 2 days later, the prosecutor reversed course and reopened the investigation. Christie's father, unwilling to let his daughter become another cold case, filed a civil lawsuit. Not to punish Jack, but to pry open the case files and uncover what was buried. But even that pursuit of justice hit a wall. The case stalled. And then, in 2013, Henry died from terminal cancer. The story could have ended there, but it didn't. That same year, a former attorney named John Aller took an interest in Christie's case. He wasn't willing to let it fade into obscurity. John dug deep, contacting everyone involved. He found a box of documents that Christie's father had collected, a father's silent battle for truth. Through his investigation, John became convinced that Henry was the killer. What led him to that conclusion? One detail stood out. Carol had once purchased marijuana from Henry. That small fact created a chilling possibility: Henry and Carol weren't strangers. In fact, they might have coordinated. One theory says Carol lured Christie into the woods with the promise of seeing a DJ. Another, darker version suggests that Carol was bait, and Henry was waiting. Whatever really happened in those woods, it's clear that Christie never stood a chance. And the people who could have saved her either stayed silent or were told to forget. She went into the forest that day, not knowing it would be her final walk. Henry had asked her to meet him there. It seemed like a normal request, perhaps even innocent at a glance. But Henry had darker intentions. He meant to harm Christ. What he didn't expect, though, was that she would fight back. The struggle between them wasn't one-sided. Henry bore the marks of her resistance, injuries that told the story of a girl who didn't go quietly. But he overpowered her. And in the silence of the trees, far from anyone who could hear her scream, Henry killed Christ. Years passed. The case turned cold. By the time a new detective, J.N., took over the investigation, Henry was already gone, dead from cancer at 63. But death didn't close the case. If anything, it lit a new fire. J.N. wasn't ready to let the past rot quietly. He dug deep, followed every lead, and in time, he wrote a book about the murder of Christ. The release of that book changed everything. Christ's family demanded answers. The pain had never left, and now it pulsed again with fury and grief. The book sparked renewed public interest. And even Henry's own relatives came forward, some of them confirming the awful truth, that Henry had confessed to them. He was the one who took Christ's life. It was enough to reopen the case in May 2014. Detectives went back through every shred of evidence. They interviewed dozens of people, rechecked Henry's confession, and even re-examined Christ's clothing. There were traces of semen still present, but the sample was too degraded to yield a DNA match. Still, they had enough. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. By the end of 2015, detectives made it official: Henry had committed the murder. But he was gone, and the law could no longer touch him. The case would never see a courtroom. Still, the truth had a weight of its own. Detectives reconstructed what happened. Henry had left his house and wandered to the road behind the local shopping center. That's where he saw her, Christ. She was alone. He made his move, using a telephone cord to restrain her and dragging her into the woods. There, he assaulted her. She fought him. He struck her with a piece of wood. He killed her. Then, as if it were just another day, Henry returned home. He told his wife everything. Instead of turning him in, she stood by him. They worked together to cover it up. And for years, they lived with that secret buried deep in their home and their hearts. It was only after his death that the truth clawed its way to the surface. The police, after all that time, issued an apology to Christ's family. It was too little, too late. But at least it was something. And then, far away from that forest and far from Henry, another story began to unfold. One no less tragic. Anel Baez Alvarez was born on March 17, 1998, in Culiacán, Mexico. Her childhood was quiet, simple. She grew up in a close-knit family: her father Aide Alvarez, her mother Hugo Basa, her brother Omar, and her younger sister Aiden. Life was ordinary, full of warmth and weekend meals, until everything changed. Her mother fell ill. Cancer doesn't just take lives, it reshapes them. The family cared for her together, each member doing their part. But when she passed, the family's heart broke. Anel was young, but the loss hardened her. She clung even tighter to her sister. They became inseparable, sharing secrets, tears, and late-night talks as they tried to understand a world that no longer had their mother in it. Anel didn't fall apart. She rose. In high school, she became the kind of girl everyone noticed. She cooked for her family, kept the house spotless, made good grades, and became the lead singer in a school band. Love songs became her favorite, especially Amor Eterno. Her voice, sweet and strong, gave people goosebumps. She lit up every room she walked into. It was around then that she met Arand Elizabeth Gutierrez. For a time, they were the best of friends. They posted pictures together, laughed at lunch, shared everything. Anel even called her a sister. But like all things too perfect, their friendship didn't last. They were the same age, but they came from different worlds. Anel stayed grounded in her family and her love for simple joys. Arand drifted. Her home life was chaotic, and she immersed herself in the darker corners of youth culture, attending underground concerts, getting involved in risky circles, and embracing a life full of rebellion. She was vocal online, political, sharp-tongued. She attended a march in support of El Chapo. She wasn't afraid to stir controversy. By 2014, the two girls barely spoke. Anel had found a new circle: Melissa, Carmen, Manuel, and her oldest friend, Maria Jose. They were kind, grounded, and shared Anel's love for peace and purpose. She bloomed among them. They adored her. Especially Maria, who saw Anel not just as a friend, but as a light. But Arand's online posts took a strange turn. Her words became cryptic. Angry. Threatening. She posted things that sounded like veiled promises of harm, confusion, or despair. And though no names were mentioned, some people at school started whispering. They said she was jealous. They said she hated how Anel had moved on. They said Arand was obsessed. On March 3rd, she posted something eerie. Maybe not now. Not tomorrow. But soon. I won't say anything then. But know I've destroyed you mentally. Then, on March 16, she wrote, "This really makes me desperate." No one knew who she was talking about. But some feared they already did. Annelle ignored it all. She wasn't one to feed drama. She celebrated her birthday on March 17 with joy. There were photos, laughter, cake. Everything seemed perfect. And then, March 19 came. Annelle didn't pick up her phone. And the nightmare began. On that day, everything started out like any other, until it didn't. Hugo, Annelle's father, was used to routine. Every afternoon, his youngest daughter would be picked up from school by Annelle, his eldest. She'd done it so many times it was second nature. So when the school called to say that no one had come for his youngest, Hugo didn't panic, not at first. Maybe Annelle had overslept. Maybe she'd gone out with friends after classes. Teenagers did that sometimes. He called Annelle, just to be sure. No answer. Maybe she was still asleep, he thought. After collecting his youngest daughter himself, Hugo tried calling again. And again. Still no response. That small seed of worry in his chest started to grow, curling its way around his thoughts. He decided to head home to their quiet neighborhood in Los Fuentes. But when he got there, he noticed something immediately off. The front door stood wide open. A chill ran down his spine. Inside, the living room was in disarray, furniture shifted, drawers half open. At first glance, it looked like a robbery. But something about the scene didn't quite fit. He called out for Annelle. No answer. He searched room by room, his voice rising with panic. Then he reached her bedroom. The door was locked. Hugo banged on it, calling Annelle's name. Still no sound. His heart pounded harder than his fists on the wood. Finally, he broke it down. There she was. Lying on the floor was his 16-year-old daughter, motionless. Her lifeless body painted a gruesome picture of violence. Hugo's breath caught in his throat. He rushed to call the police. When officers arrived, they found Hugo upstairs, sitting in stunned silence beside his 10-year-old, who clung to him, confused and frightened. The officers were led to Annelle's room. The scene was brutal. Blood pooled beneath her body. There were signs someone had attempted to clean the mess but gave up halfway. The autopsy later revealed the horror in its full measure. Annelle had been stabbed 65 times. This wasn't random. This was rage. This was personal. Police quickly ruled out forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered glass. That could only mean one thing: Annelle had let the killer in. They checked her phone, hoping for clues, a message, a call, something. But it was clean. No sign that she had planned to meet anyone that day. So maybe it wasn't planned. Maybe the killer showed up unannounced. And Annelle, trusting them, opened the door. With no surveillance cameras in the neighborhood, detectives turned to the next best thing: the people. Neighbors mentioned seeing a slim girl with long black hair leaving the house. That description didn't give them much, until they began narrowing down who in Annelle's life fit that image. They questioned friends, family, anyone who knew Annelle. Everyone spoke of her kindness. Her friendliness. No one could imagine someone wanting to hurt her. But while digging through social media, police stumbled across a post that caught their attention. It was from a girl named Iran. Her message? Odd. She expressed shock over Annelle's death. A little too shocked. People online noticed too. Comments turned hostile, accusing Iran of being involved. The pressure became too much. She deleted her account. But not before the police captured screenshots and started asking questions. Friends revealed that Annelle and Iran used to be close. But something changed. Iran had grown distant. Jealous, maybe. Annelle had always been more popular, more outgoing. Digging deeper, detectives found disturbing posts made by Iran. Angry, cryptic things. And one post in particular, made just hours after Annel's murder, stood out. "I was so stupid. Oh my God, what did I do?" Suddenly, Arand wasn't just a name. She was the name. But the police said nothing publicly. They didn't want her to vanish before they could move. Meanwhile, Annel's death shattered the community. Her funeral in Guamuchil was packed, family, friends, teachers, classmates, all gathered to say goodbye. Many couldn't even speak through the tears. Among the crowd, one figure drew hushed murmurs, Arand. She arrived with her mother, dressed oddly for the hot day, a hooded sweater with sleeves pulled low, hiding something. Her head hung low, long black hair veiling her face. She walked slowly, sat quietly, but the tension around her was unmistakable. People whispered. The police watched. Then, they made their move. They approached her gently, asked her to come with them. She didn't resist. At the station, the questioning began. At first, she denied everything. But the mask cracked quickly. Beneath her sleeves, she had bruises and scratches, defensive wounds left by Annel as she fought for her life. That was when the truth spilled out. It began months earlier, with a photo. A private moment between them, captured and posted online by Annel without asking. In the photo, they were partially undressed, caught in an embrace. Arand was furious. She begged Annel to take it down. At first, Annel refused. Eventually, she did. But the damage had already been done. The photo circulated. Whispers spread. One boy told Arand he had a copy. That was the final crack in their friendship. Humiliated and angry, Arand turned bitter. Obsessive. She started posting dark messages online, venting her rage. On March 19, 2014, she posted something cryptic. Then she went to Annel's house. Only one of them would walk out alive. The story of Annel's death wasn't just about a murder, it was about trust betrayed, a friendship shattered by pride and pain, and a moment of violence that left a community forever scarred. And in the end, it was not a stranger who took her life, but someone who once called her friend. As we wrap up this chilling story, remember, we'll be diving into another mystery in our next video. Stay tuned to Outlaw Operations for more gripping tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update.